13. The search took the rest of the day, but as the midnight hour approached, Rodin had what he needed: a name and an address. And a lot more. The man was Sporif, and was what many called a helping hand. He worked for Malice at the moment, although the arrangement was not formal. He was simply there to do the jobs Malice required, things Malice couldn't or wouldn't do, either for himself or through other channels. Sporif had form, he'd worked for names connected with Dystopian, and had also been busy in other districts. There was some connection with the Paterno's brothers, along with tales of a need to flee. Not surprising, Rodin thought. The Paterno's brothers were not known for keeping their word, and would often turn on those who helped them. Rodin had worked for them once, and had vowed never to do so again. After such high-profile connections, working with Malice must be something of a come-down. Why was someone with form involved with someone so small-time? There were a couple of possibilities that came to mind. Either Sporif was lying low after a screw-up, and maybe the Paterno's brothers were after him, or he had a different angle on Malice and was looking to undermine him. Or maybe, like Rodin himself, Sporif was taking things easy for a spell. Rodin ran through recordings of the meetings between the two men, always the same time, the same place. Sloppy, any routine made surveillance easier. Malice was clearly on the make. He had plans to push into a drug supply chain, with an aim of taking the operation over within a matter of months, and hinted that this would be the start of his empire. He didn't mention Boronov by name, but it was clear from the hints he dropped that this was his target. Rodin didn't dwell on the stupidity of this. The old man had lost a daughter, and it looked like he'd lose a son pretty soon too. But Malice needed money. He admitted to Sporif that he would have preferred to simply take the money from his father, but there were too many accounts, and the old man would not give up all the details. Helping with this foolish vendetta was his way in. From what Rodin could gather, a few years ago father and son had not been on speaking terms. Malice spoke of his father's reluctance to accept how the world had changed, and Rodin thought it possible that the old man strongly disapproved of Malice's work methods. They had gone their separate ways. But now Malice was back, playing the role of dutiful son. The list was part of this. Rodin didn't quite understand what had happened, but somehow the old man saw the clients as responsible for his daughter's death. He wanted all of them removed, and he wanted them to understand why. Hence the actions Rodin had been called upon to perform, and those infantile messages he was instructed to deliver. Malice had hired a number of mercenaries. Sporif had helped in this, and had even removed a couple of the clients himself. He wanted to take care of more, but Malice dissuaded his helping hand. It was part of his plan, he said, to spread the workload. He convinced his father it was better that way. If one person did too many contracts, they might start putting the pieces together. He convinced his father of the need to make these look like fairly random hits, otherwise the controller, the one the old man wanted to suffer the most, might learn what was going on. They didn't want to risk the controller escaping. The plan hadn't worked out too well. Something clearly reached Ratch and spooked him into running. Sporif tried tracking him with no joy. A few leads but nothing substantial. It seemed that nobody would talk to the man. Sporif might be good with people, but Rodin knew the paid companions were better. It was part of their job. They read others and knew what to say. Chances were they would have spotted something dodgy in Sporif, and they would have closed ranks. He might have offered money, but a decently paid companion knew the value of confidentiality. If word got around that they talked for cash, who would want to hire them? No controller would want them as a worker. Their careers would be over. That was something for Rodin to think about. He would have to be as genuine as he could if he were to learn anything from them. As the recordings played, Rodin learnt something else. The old man was looking to his daughter's future, knowing he was getting too old. His original plan was for her to take control of all his funds when he passed on, but that was not going to happen now. And so, he would use the money to help lay her memory to rest. He was offering high rewards for the contracts, but Malice was in charge of the day-to-day work. The first meeting for any mercenary was with the old man, as it had been in Rodin's case, but all subsequent meetings were with Malice. He had control of the money. And he was keeping some for himself. From what Rodin could make out, sometimes as much as 50%. It didn't surprise him one bit. Rodin knew that Malice would have no qualms about taking all the old man's savings, if only Sporif could discover where they were. He didn't care about his father at all. The only person he was interested in was himself. In some ways Rodin respected this, but it made for a dangerous opponent. With most people, there were ways to manipulate them through their feelings for others. It was something of a low tactic, but Rodin had used it on occasions. The odd slip regarding what might happen to a child, or what could happen to a partner. Maybe a meeting where a parent was present, unaware what was going on. And the person in the spotlight would be considerably more malleable. That wouldn't happen with Malice. The only threats he'd take notice of would be ones against himself. It was late, and Rodin had much to do the next day. Before turning off his screen, he called up the address he'd obtained for Sporif and allowed himself a smile. He recognized the street. He could even picture the building. Tomorrow he'd prepare for a house call. That night as he slept alone, Rodin had company. She was the one. There was no need to do anything but be together. He knew everything about her, and she knew everything about him. They could communicate with the briefest of glances, the slightest of touches. Although they lay on the bed naked, there was no need to do more than let their fingers entwine. Their intimacy was deeper than flesh. They were intimate within their minds, within their souls. The feelings were new and strange, but they felt comfortable and right. With each touch he felt a rush of memories, emotions rising in his mind, images playing to support them. He saw the two of them together in a park, in a house. He saw them with others, laughing and joking, stealing eye contact whenever they could. He heard her soft voice, sometimes spreading out like the sea, sometimes crashing down like a waterfall. Discussions, some disagreements, but never with each other. Always about something else. They were open. They could talk about anything, and they did. Conversations that became increasingly intense. And then, there would be the need for simple company. The need to lie back, doing nothing more than being with each other. His hands brushed her smooth, perfect skin, a finger winding a path from her neck, meandering to mount soft curves and brush hard nipples before reaching further down over a smooth stomach, aware of muscles beneath his hand. Her own hand made a similar path, starting from his shoulders where it squeezed him before running down a fraction beyond tickling. As her hand reached further down, Rodin shifted his weight, moving his position so that she brushed him, then held him gently. He felt himself growing within her grasp. And she smiled. He could not make out her features. Her nose was small maybe, but he couldn't make out the color of her eyes. From one angle they seemed large enough to fall into, yet from another angle they were small, spread apart. Her long hair was short, and the color was not clear. One moment when she flicked her head it was blonde, but as he ran his fingers through it, stroking behind her ears, he saw it was a reddish brown. And she wore studs in each ear, but then there were no holes and the skin was smooth. When she was straddling him, he saw small pert breasts easily cupped in the palm of his hand. But when he was over her, flesh hung to each side and her chest rippled with each thrust. She changed constantly. So did the room. They were on a bed, the sheets a crumpled mess beneath them. Then covers lay across his shoulders. Then they were seated, and others were in the room engaged in their own embraces. They were back on a small single bed, with hardly any room to move. He didn't want them to fall off. They shouldn't be doing this. If they made too much sound, they would be discovered. The bed was gone, replaced by benches. Figures burst through the door. He heard the shouts, the accusations and threats. He was being pushed and pulled, gloved hands grasping him. He was struck. She was cowering. Then she was fighting back. This was the smaller one, the petite thing he didn't want to harm. She was kicking and punching. But it did no good. They struck her. Hard. With the sticks in their hands. Rodin heard a crack, knew it was bone. There was a scream. And the woman was cowering. Different once again. He turned. Another woman. This one was large and she was stroking her bulge. Rodin could see a dark line running down through her belly button. They didn't care. They kicked. Rodin yelled out, even as they carried on. Even as he saw blood. Hers. His. Theirs. And his body was sticky. Something warm, but it was a cold heat he felt. He wanted to see something else. A couple on a bed. But he was part of the couple. He was there, lashed down. He couldn't move. He was tied down. No. Not tied. It was the drug from his lance. He had no lance. He was naked. He was trussed up, unable to move as the pounding increased. Then sharper pain. He was being cut, the sticks replaced with blades. She was beside him. On both sides. And at his feet. And she was covered in blood. Yes, the blood. From the incision. He held the flesh in his hand and rammed it between her legs. He forced it higher. From all around, screaming and crying. Blood and flesh wherever he turned. Even when he shut his eyes, the vision remained. So he looked. He studied the lips wet with blood. He saw the mess within and the matted hair. And he knew he had done this. This was his job. It was what he did. This was his reality. And he saw Fallon bleeding to death on the bed beside her. He used his blade to bring the man's suffering to an end. And sleep came once more. But it had been a struggle. Even in his unconsciousness, Rodin knew he needed something stronger. He needed to escape these nightmares.